Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be most likely my final Shadowlands Warlock feedback Google document update. Now, at this point, it is September 30th or so at 5 in the morning, and I think for the most part, seeing as how we're having PTR testing, a stress test tomorrow of the pre-patch, and the candidate has indeed been marked as released again, we can probably expect pre-patch sometime within the next 2 weeks, and then again, after that, probably the actual Shadowlands launch in late October. So, this is probably going to be the final update to the feedback document. We're going to go over general feedback for Warlocks, Affliction, Destruction, Demonology, maybe in that order, I don't remember exactly, and then a bit of Covenant feedback, and finally a little bit of Legendary feedback that I've been wanting to give for a while around a few effects that I think could use a tiny bit of tweaking. Now, quick shameless plug here, any weak auras, profiles, add-ons you see in this video are available to you guys for free on my Twitch if you want to swing by, hang out, drop a follow, grab them anytime, ask any questions. So, let's just get right into this, starting off with some general Warlock feedback that I've been sort of harping on for a while here. The first thing, 6-second pet summons. Now, I will say I have condensed a lot of this document. It was about 5.5 pages before. It's about, I think, 2.5 for Warlock feedback, like specs, and then about a page for Legendaries and Covenants. 6-second pet summons are restrictive when swapping pets in both Mythic Plus and Raids alike. The return of Fel Domination does indeed help with that. However, swapping from your Fel Hunter to your Imp for a Purge sort of is a problem, because even if you Fel Dom out your Imp, for example, you still have that 6-second summon on your Fel Gun or Fel Guard, Fel Hunter, there you go, Fel everything, Demonology, you know, whatever. For the most part, we've seen this, I guess, assumed this is a PvP change, and to be fair, like, killing pets in arenas and PvP is, you can just resummon them like this, and it's not really that big of a deal. My suggestion here is, if it is indeed a PvP change, just make it a 2.5 second change in PvE. It feels really, really bad having my pet die to one of 8,000 different things in Mythic Plus or rating. It shouldn't be killing it in the first place, and then not even resummoning it because I'm in the middle of a Reign of Chaos window, or there's 18 mobs attacking us, or I just don't really have the time. A 6-second summon costing a shard in combat is frustrating, and there have been plenty of times where I've cast Fel Domination to get my pet out, it's died again 2 minutes later, or I guess 2 seconds later, and I just leave it dead. Just the way it is. It feels really bad. There is also the option of adding 2 charges to Fel Domination, which would sort of help. It would fix the problem of pet twisting, and also for the most part probably remove the pet dying often to random mechanics thing, but that's sort of a decent change. I don't believe Fel Dominations I ever had 2 charges. It's possible, but for the most part, this just needs to be addressed. This is like the #1 big thing, I feel, at this point for Warlocks. Secondly, Ritual of Doom in its early form provided extra health from your Doom Guard for demonic consumption for Demonology. Seeing as how Destro and Aff can't really take advantage of that, I think that that effect should be removed. Now, I will say I have not tested with this in the past 2 or so weeks. I heard that it had been removed. It wasn't siphoning health anymore when you cast your Tyrant with Consumption, the talent, but then I heard it was back. So, if that's the case, it just needs to not work that way. Because when we tested it in raiding in Mythic Plus before, in raid testing of Nathria and a slew of keys, summoning it before the run starts, it doesn't actually attack anything. It just stands there. And when the keystone is put in and the run starts, it just despawns. So even if it's not standing there, even if it's just standing there, not attacking anything, if you're playing Demonology with Demonic Consumption, it's still a pretty decent damage boost. It's about the same health as your actual Felguard pet. To the same extent, if they make it attack in raiding in Mythic Plus, I just don't think it's a good idea. Mythic Plus, maybe it's a bit more leeway there, but raiding, for sure, having a large 1-hour cooldown, like Summon Doomguard, which also takes a bit of time to set up, is just not the play, in my opinion. It might not seem like it's incredibly, like, a huge deal when it comes to raiding, but it was about 5% of my damage, and across 4 or 5 Warlocks in a raid, more if you stack them due to certain things, it's a big deal. So I just don't think at this point, it's a cool returning ability. I just don't think it should be a thing in raiding in Mythic Plus. At this current point, it does seem like it's not going to be attacking. Just wanted to solidify that point. The final thing here, and this is one thing that we have not touched on for really over the course of all of Alpha and Beta, up until last week when myself, Shelley, and THE were on Sloot's channel for the Warlock Deep Dive, having health stones despawn at the start of every dungeon would be a large boost to Warlock utility in Mythic Plus. At the moment, players are able to simply summon an alt Warlock and give the entire group 3 Hellstones, which, you know, that removes a lot of the utility as a Warlock in Mythic Plus, because, you know, when I ask about Warlock utility on stream, what do we bring to Plus? People say Healthstones, but no, we don't. Our utility for Healthstones at this point in BFA and currently in Shadowlands, unless this has changed, starts after the 3rd Healthstone is used for a party member, because we can drop 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It makes it a much harder decision when to Health Pot or Healthstone, I suppose, if you don't have a lock in your group, but still. Other buffs despawn that classes give if they're not in the actual group when you start the key. Healthstones should do the same thing. It would be a substantial increase to utility when it comes to Plus. And at this point, Warlock is a bit lacking, I guess, comparatively to other classes like Rogue, Demon Hunter. I mean, Demonology doesn't even have an interrupt, and don't worry, we'll get to that in a bit. So I think that would be a really good step in the right direction for Warlocks in Mythic Plus. Let's get into some Affliction talk here and actually look at some gameplay. Oh, and by the way, guys, I forgot to mention, if you want access to view this document on your own, I'll have a link to it in the video description. It's also pinned on my Twitter, which you can also find a link to in the video description for future reference if you want to find it later on. So, getting into Affliction here, I've got 4 points that I want to hit on. Starting off, this has been something that's sort of been an issue, I guess, when it comes to setting, I guess, Shadowlands, but for the most part, we've just been playing Drain Soul. Currently, Drain Soul applies Shadow's Embrace over the course of roughly 2 seconds, which is actually a little faster, depending on haste, due to each incremental tick of Drain Soul granting a stack. Shadow Bolt, however, which also grants Shadow's Embrace if you don't have the Drain Soul talent taken, takes roughly 8 seconds. It's about, I guess, 6-ish. I probably should change that, depending on travel time. Having to cast 3 different Shadow Bolts. I feel there needs to be a way to sort of make Shadow Bolt stack Embrace faster. A proposed change is potentially having Shadow Bolt apply 2 stacks of Shadow's Embrace. And you can see here what I mean is when we go to this dummy here, I have a combat timer down here. You can see how long it takes to get 3 stacks of Shadow's Embrace. Just go right in. We're at 3 stacks. 2.5 or 3 seconds? Like, not very long. But if you're at like a, you know, getting close to like, I don't know, 20-ish yards here, give or take, swapping to Inevitable Demise. We'll start a stopwatch here because I have to cast this spell or so. Stacking Shadow's Embrace to 3. We'll actually put this up. 1, 2, 3. To be fair, actually about 8 seconds, give or take a little bit. It's pretty crazy. It's just, there's a big difference there. And obviously, Nightfall procs and things can make a bit of a difference also. And keep in mind that Haunt also applies 1 stack of Shadow's Embrace. But still, like, there's a bit of a difference there as a whole. I think they could easily be addressed by just making Shadow Bolt stack Shadow's Embrace 2 stacks per Shadow Bolt cast. Secondly here, this is something we talk about a lot too. So the Siege just needs a rework at this point. I feel. It needs to be overhauled with the introduction of Malefic Rapture to Affliction's toolkit. A potential change could be so the Seeds now also applies Agony as well as Corruption to all the targets that it hits. Now, this might seem pretty OP, and I get that. I get that. But I really don't think that it is. So, this would give a player a choice between spreading our 2 main dots faster, which is an issue because we're casting City Corruption to, you know, pop, to put it on every target. We're precasting it when the tank pulls. But we still have to individually apply all our agonies. And that's one of the longest things. It takes a while to get that rolling with Mythic Plus versus a class that can go in and just start blasting everything, right? And those agonies also take time to ramp up damage-wise. So this gives you the choice of either casting a seed and having it apply corruption and agony to all the mobs that it hits, or have to manually apply your agonies, but also have access to Vile Taint, the talent, because you can't have both. It's either Sow or Vile. Playing Vile Taint gives you a dot on every mob that it hits, and also gives you an extra dot on every mob that it hits, which applies Rapture damage, because it's a 3rd dot on 4, 5, 6 mobs or whatever. So the Seeds would give you a bit more, like, I guess a bit less setup time, but a lower ceiling damage-wise. But Vile Taint gives you a higher ceiling. It's just where it depends, and Singularity is more or less your single target choice here. But I really don't think this would be too OP. In its current form, it's just not a very good talent, and just too similar to Rapture. Seed of Corruption still costs a shard, when you actually end up casting it, if you have some of the seeds, and the damage is just not incredibly impactful from what we've seen in testing. I wasn't really impressed with it, and it just felt like a poor man's Rapture. It wasn't worth it. I feel like at this point, so it's just not really going to be the play when you're in Mythic Plus as Affliction. It just needs to be addressed. I don't think a flat damage buff is going to help. It could also be something similar to Searing Nightmare for Shadow Priest that causes your seed to deal more damage if your target has Agony or Corruption on it. Otherwise, it applies Agony if they don't. So there's a lot of ways they can take this, but I just think at this point, a flat damage buff, unless it's a big one, is probably just not going to help. In its current form, I'm sure at a certain number of mobs, it probably outscales Rapture, but I mean, Mythic Plus, you know, target capping and everything, and also Affliction and Plus compared to Destro right now, just a bit odd. Number 3, and this is one that people have talked about a lot on stream for Mythic Plus, for rating, for everything. Dot-based effects dealing more damage than they currently are, 7 to 9%, which is about what they deal, single target-wise. A bit less depending which build you're running here. Drain Soul builds, everything. By the way, Necrolord stocks rising fast. Is a real concern to the Affliction community. While Rapture is our new spender, it would be nice to see a bit of our overall damage shifted away from Rapture back into our dots. It would also help a bit with ramp-up time in Mythic Plus or burst AoE settings. Now, this was brought up on stream, and obviously, like, there'd have to be a balance here, because shifting a lot of the power away from Rapture into our dots is an issue, because it affects, you know, our, I guess, burst damage, and plus, whatever you're doing AoE-wise, once you get your dots rolling, if Rapture doesn't hit very hard. At the same time, leaving it the way it is, I mean, we're a dot class. I know that the new profile is Rapture, and that's sort of the way they're trying to take the class and move it, just shift it that way, but I just don't really know. I just feel like our dots should deal more damage. But then again, finding the tuning there is tough, because dot class scaling when it comes to multi-target, later tiers, everything else, is normally a bit of a headache. I remember back to Antorus where they nerfed Shadow Priest dots multiple times and Warlock dots a couple of times too. I know that it makes for a bit of a headache, and I like this version of Affliction. But I mean, in the end, we are a dot class, and dot management is a thing. But right now, it just sort of seems like dot management, meaning keep your dots up and just Rapture as much as you can, you know, within windows, or depending what legendary you're playing. It doesn't feel like AF of old in a sense. I'd like to see a shift towards this if possible. The final thing here, and this is sort of an issue that we've had for a while in Mythic Plus, Plus and rating. Dark Lair as a cooldown is very underwhelming, especially in Mythic Plus. With the removal of stacking unstable afflictions, Death Bolt being moved to PvP, our Dark Lair cooldown is nowhere near as strong as it is in BFA. You have 1 UA up. You don't have 5. You're not being able to cast a Death Bolt with 1,000,000 dots rolling for a huge crit or even just a huge hit. It's just not very strong. Yeah, the extension's good. It allows more Rapture cast, allows more Drain cast and all that. In Mythic Plus, though, you're already spending enough time to set up on a pack. And then finally your Dark Lair comes out, and its damage is increased by every dot you have active, but its I-beam damage is still garbage, and it might be a bit of extra funnel damage on a mob. It's just not very strong. I propose a change to Dark Lair where it casts an AoE I-beam on each target with dots applied. It could also deal more damage to a target that has your Unstable Affliction on it, which is limited to 1. So it favors AF's new toolkit being a sort of like a sub-rogue that harvests resources from surrounding mobs and has like a priority mob with UA on it that takes more damage from your I-beam, more damage from your Rapture if you're playing the Conduit. I think it fits this version of AF very well, and I'd like to see a shift in this direction, because at this point, AF, you know, Dark Lair more so, and just AF's damage profile with things, you know, and falling where they have, you can probably use a bit of a boost in Plus, especially when it comes to your main cooldown. So moving into destruction territory here, there are really only 3 things that I'd like to see change, for the most part, for destruction in Shadowlands. The first one being here is it's Soulfire. The reduction of Soulfire's cooldown from 1 minute to 45 seconds is a welcome change. However, they also changed it to apply Immolate to a mob that it hits and remove the instant cast Incinerate proc that it gave. Now, I feel this makes more problems than it solves in a sense here. Being able to cast Soulfire inside of a Havoc window, which does give you 2 full Soul Shards, you can Havoc a Soulfire, and then use the instant cast Incinerate in the window, I believe greatly improved its playability in, I say certain settings, in most settings, if you were going to even take Soulfire, and we don't really know if we're going to, but still. Most of the time, you had already applied Immolate to a Havoc target before entering the window, and then casting Soulfire extends that Immolate past Pandemic range, which is just a DPS loss and just sort of clunky, you know. I believe allowing Soulfire to be affected by Backdraft would also further increase the likeliness of its being selected in a variety of settings. The thing is, I know this was cited as a way to sort of kickstart your damage. I think that's like word for word what they said in the post. But the thing is, like, this is affected by Roaring Blaze. If I swap to Roaring Blaze here, you can see Soulfire, it's there. You're not going to want to precast Soulfire, I feel at least for the most part, playing this, if you don't have the Roaring Blaze buff up in the first place. And Soulfire checks if Roaring Blaze is up upon resolution, not when it hits the target. So there is travel time on it. You can see when I actually Havoc it here to show you guys it is Havocable. But let me try to get my bars here too, that'd be helpful. You can't like cast it and conflag. It just checks upon resolution. So the spell is cool. I sort of wish it had the cooldown reduction built into it like it does in BFA right now. But I think it just needs a little bit of work. Number 2. Fire and Brimstone's damage output seems subpar compared to Inferno and Cataclysm. The shard generation that it brings even after the buff still does not warrant playing the talent over Inferno, especially in a Reign of Chaos window. Even with Necrolord Decimating Bolt before the nerf, which you can see is when you have Inferno, it's 200% to incinerate. When I go Fire and Brimstone, it's 80. They nerfed it a lot. It still wasn't better than Inferno. Rain of Fire is buffed damage-wise in Shadowlands. This is a further increase to Rain of Fire's damage. And also, the chance to generate a Soul Shard fragment upon cast, like, it's so incredible in a Reign of Chaos window. You get just so many shards coming in. It's just Rain of Fire spam over and over and over. You don't even really want to cast Fire and Brimstone late in that window anyways, as long as you're proccing Infernals, because it's just a wasted cast. Why cast it when I'm at 3 shards anyways? If I can just cast another Rain, I'm going to overcap in the first place. So I feel that like they could actually change, I guess, increase the damage that Fire and Brimstone does to targets surrounding your main one. You know, it's 40%. They could probably increase it to like 60. Maybe a bit of Necrolord tuning would be at hand. I don't even know. Like, I think it's probably fine the way it is at that point. But maybe look at increasing the damage a bit. Potentially the Shard Gen, it's probably fine, I suppose. It's just not better than Inferno. And Reign of Chaos, Reign of Fire, Inferno, Soul Conduit, Wilfred's, they all just work so well together. And Cataclysm is your single target choice here. There's just not much to it. It's the only real game in this row, single target wise. So there's that. I enjoy Fire and Brimstone. I like it to be baseline. It's not going to be toggleable like it used to be, but that's that. The final thing here for Destro is the lack of abilities that Destruction can cast on the move is also a concern. And this has been a concern for a while. You can use your Demonic Circle and your Gateway for, to leverage movement on, predictable movement fights. But for the most part, all you can really cast is Conflag or Rain of Fire on the move. But, I mean, that's a decent bit of time of DPS loss. Destruction is severely lacking spells to cast on the move. Shadow Burn being a base part of our toolkit would help alleviate those issues while also bringing with it the Havoc Shadow Burn playstyle that used to be so exciting a long time ago when it was a baseline part of our toolkit. Havoc, Shard, Sniping, it was just a lot of fun, and it really raised the ceiling as far as like playing Destro goes. I would like to see that back. A return of Fell Flame would also be a welcome solution. Technically, Dimensional Rifts could also be a thing, but I just don't think at this point in time, with them all being tied around the Scepter of Sargeras and that kind of stuff, I don't think it really is possible. But either way, I think Destro's movement, just like abilities you can cast in the move, just needs to be addressed. And technically, you can tie this into Soulfire too, giving you an instant cast Incinerate, but once again, it's now Immolate. So, all right, now obviously I saved the best for last, being Demonology feedback. I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but this is just that Demonology is. This is just the current state of Demonology in Shadowlands. There are some changes here that are important to highlight, so I definitely want to get into this, though, being real. Number 1, Axe Toss, the interrupt, needs to interrupt before it stuns and affect every mob, stun, immune, or not. Not having a reliable interrupt in Mythic Plus is a severe hindrance to our toolkit and playability. To that same extent, Call Fellhunter, the PvP talent, could also be moved to our PvE toolkit while reverting Axe Toss to just a stun. This fits the spec thematically, but also solving multiple issues. Now, previously, we have cited having, like, the Animal Companion BM Hunter double pet thing. I'd like that the most. I think it's cool. I think it fits Demonology. But at this point in beta, I'll take anything. I will take anything. I swear. Any kind of reliable interrupt. The thing is, I trimmed a lot of this actual, like, paragraph off here, but I've used this example a million times. Tall as our Skyscreamers, you have to interrupt those. If you use an Axe Toss on them, it'll stun them. And then they're going to recast. This improved version of Axe Toss does the exact same thing to mobs that will recast their spell. Some do if you stun them, and some don't. Skyscreamers recast. There are a handful of mobs in Mythic Plus and Shadowlands that also recast if they're stunned. Bring a DPS into a group. You have to rely you have to know they're going to be able to interrupt when you need them to. It can't be like, oh, well, I can't interrupt that mob, I can't do this, I can't do that. You need an interrupt. Like, this is just so basic and simple. Like, I don't know if it's because Axe Toss is like a single target stun, and we have Shadow Fury too. They don't want to give us that, but this is just a basic core part of a toolkit for every DPS in the game, except Demonology. There are mobs like Skyscreamers in Shadowlands that will recast if you stun them. There are mobs also, a good example is the Toxic Blade mobs in Motherlode. I forget what they're called. The Assassins, I believe, right? You can stun those, which is an uninterruptible cast, but you can stun them and it will stop the Toxic Blades cast. It won't recast it. So there is a bit of use. There is use for stuns on mobs like that. I would love to see my number one choice here is just getting Call Fell Hunter baseline in our PvE toolkit if it's the theme of the spec, a Master of Pets, a Master of Demons, whatever, and Axe Toss to just go back to being a single target stun. It might seem a bit OP, but being real, a lot of classes have an AoE stun, a single target stun, and interrupt. And I think that, well, some do, at least, like Demon Hunters, even though they have a talent into one, still a Demon Hunter. They have more utility in a bad day than we have past 8 expansions. Okay, don't chew me in the comments. Don't chew me out in the comment section there. I love Demon Hunters. They're great. Anyways, I just really hope this is addressed because it's going to be an issue over the course of the entire expansion, and it really will be. I brought this up on Sloot's, the Warlock deep dive with Chalet and THC as well. It's going to be an issue. I don't really understand why it's a thing and why we're skittering around the edge of just not giving us interrupt in the first place. The third thing here, Grimoire Felguard was initially a 1.5 minute cooldown in BFA, Battle for Azeroth, Alpha Beta, but was changed to a 2 minute cooldown right before BFA's worldwide release. This was less than 48 hours before it released. I remember where I was exactly when I saw this. I was like, okay. With Tyrant being a 1.5 minute cooldown, it feels rotationally awkward having to hold another half a minute for Grimoire Felguard. Now, there are two sides to this. The extension is worth it, so there's that. At the same time, I know at times the cooldown change could have been for a reason, right? It could be to break up the normal 1.5 minute cooldown cycling that Demonology has. Okay, hold your Tyrant for another 30 seconds, but you get a better, stronger overall CD. Grimoire Felguard has strong ability, and extending it by extra duration is pretty big. Also, now having demonic consumption and, you know, it was reworked, so it siphons health from your pets now instead of stacking just imps. Grimoire Felguard is even more relevant. So I get that having a 1.5 minute CD on your Grimoire might make things a bit OP, but I sort of just wanted to highlight this because if it is on the radar, it would be a nice quality of life change. To a similar extent, if Nether Portal is to remain a talent in Shadowlands, I feel it needs to be changed to spawn demons based off the amount of soul shards spent and not every time you spend soul shards. So let me elaborate here. We can just close this out. Nether Portal tears open a portal to Twisting Nether for 15 seconds. Every time you spend soul shards. Every time you spend soul shards. You will also command demons from the Nether to come out and fight for you. So you can cast a 3-shard. You can open up your portal and then cast a 3-shard Hand of Gul'dan. That 3-shard Hand of Gul'dan is going to get you 1 demon. You can open up your portal, have no shards for whatever reason, and just go Shadowbolt Hand of Gul'dan at 1 shard. That 1 shard is also going to get you 1 demon. That 1-shard Hand of Gul'dan. So the rotational sequencing is normally 5 shards portal to 4. Grimoire Felguard, Vile Fiend. Dogs either staying at 2 shards depending on Demonic Calling proc, or going to 0 without them, cast it. And then outside of that, it's Shadowbolt Hand, Shadowbolt Hand, Shadowbolt Hand, you know, X amount of times depending on haste and all that, which summons more demons out of the portal. Now, you never cast anything outside of a 3-shard Hand of Gul'dan unless like you're setting up your Tyrant, something weird's going on. It's just not optimal when it comes to your rotation. So if this is here to break up like the normal 3-shard Hand of Gul'dan cycling and all that, I just don't think it's a good move. I just think it would do a lot for the spec, rotationally fluidity wise, rotationally and mechanically, just to have this function like everything else does for Demonology. Just make it summon demons based off the amount of shards you spend, because you're still casting 3 Shadow Bolts, or, you know, X spells to generate to 3 shards, and then cast a Hand of Gul'dan. It won't break up, you know, rotations, all that kind of stuff. And there are certain effects that, you know, need to have 3 imps active, like your Implosion Legendary, which I think is here. And let's be real, you're probably not playing this with this, but it can lead to a few nasty overlaps, just things you don't really want, just subpar gameplay. So I would really like to see Nether Portal shifted to just being every time you spend shards, for however many shards you spend, you summon X demons, you know. That would be, I think, a very good step in the right direction for Portal, and hopefully tuning also comes to it, because I'd like to play with it. It's my favorite talent, but, well, consumption's just that good. I have to say, though, now that we've talked about Aff, Destro, and Demo, we've had a lot of things that I guess have sort of needed to be addressed. We've given feedback on a lot of things in Shadowlands, and going over the document that we had listed from, I guess, July. I think it was like end of July. We're in September now, end of September. Like, most of the points that we gave feedback on were changed. So I think Warlock's in a good spot. There's a little bit for Destro, a little bit for Demo, a little bit for Aff. But like I said, I think Warlock's in a pretty good spot. Most of the changes that we needed, I feel like we got. There are some quality of life changes, once again, like Nether Portal, like Soulfire, like, I'm sure Affliction has something. But, for the most part, I think Lock is in a good spot mechanically and rotationally as a whole. Getting into the Legendaries, though, this is something that I've wanted to give feedback on for a while. I just haven't really had a chance to. So there are 4 that I want to cover here. Now, number 1, we're going to talk about Wilfred's. Notice there's no destruction feedback in here. It's fine for Destro. Perfectly fine. No problems. We're good to go. The Wilfred Sigil of Superior Summoning Legendary Effect is undertuned CD reduction-wise for Demonology. And it is. I actually mentioned this to Slew on his stream and said that, yeah, you can wear it, and over the course of about a minute and a half, it brings your Tyrant from minute 30 to a minute 19. And he laughed. He doesn't even play Demonology, and he laughed. Like, yeah, what a great effect. It's just undertuned. The current CD reduction of 0.3 seconds per soul shard spent equates to roughly like a minute 18, a minute 19 Tyrant, single target wise, at similar levels of haste around where we are right now. Now, obviously, this effect will scale with higher levels of haste, meaning that, okay, it might need to be looked at and be tuned a bit later on, but I would much rather have this be like a 0.5 second reduction. I think mathematically we ran it and it's like a 110 Tyrant at 0.5. Which is a lot similar to live. I mean, once again, 118 to 110, not a huge difference, but 130 to 110 is a bit of a difference there. And it does leave a bit of wiggle room, like I said, for haste scaling, which puts you more so around 1 minute, which is about what we have, give or take a bit, in BFA. I think this will do a lot for Demonology, because Demo as a whole right now, Destro's in a good spot with Legendaries. Affliction, well, Affliction's Affliction. It's in a pretty good spot for Legendaries. Demonology, I feel, doesn't really have one like front runner effect. For the most part, you're probably just playing the Hand of Gul'dan one, the one that gives you a chance to cast an extra Hand of Gul'dan. I don't believe I have it crafted right now. The one that gives you a chance to have an extra Hand of Gul'dan cast whenever you cast your initial hand. Like, and it'll replicate however many shards you put into it. If you put 1 shard, great, it'll give you 1 imp. If you do 3 shards, it gives you 3 imps, so 6 if it procs. But it doesn't really feel legendary. It doesn't feel like it's a legendary effect. It feels like a tier bonus. It feels like something that's just should be on a ring boot set somewhere, And that as a whole is probably the best one that Demonology has, unless you're playing a weird build, like Bale Spider's Burning Core or the Dog build. So I think Wilfred's, if it was tuned better, would put Demonology in a much better spot, having a shorter Tyrant. And hey, if we get around a minute Tyrant, that means every other one can line up with your Grimoire Felguard. So 2 birds, 1 stone. Number 2, the Bale Spider's Burning Core Legendary, which is, I believe, right here. There we go. The Bale Spider's Burning Core Demonology Legendary is frustrating to play with rotationally when juggling multiple Demonic Core stacks. And this is, if you watch my previous video on the Demonology rotation, because Decimating Bolt from Necro Lord is now affecting Demon Bolt, there's a lot of damage amps to Demon Bolt. This is one of them. It is really frustrating trying to cast 3-4 Shadow Bolts while juggling Demonic Core stacks, which you dump by casting Demon Bolt, while juggling Demonic Core stacks, while casting Power Siphon for 2 more stacks. It's excessive. I think shifting this more towards what the Affliction one is, which gives you, I have this here, let me see. There we go. Shifting it from this more so to this, giving you like a maintenance buff for 8 seconds, 6 seconds, 5 seconds. That's, well, probably a little longer than that, hopefully, that you can maintain by recasting a Shadow Bolt, I think would make this a lot better of a Legendary. Now, obviously, you have to nerf it probably, because 4 stacks is a 100% increase in Demon Bolt, but I think that would make it better, because it just felt really awkward rotationally trying to stack this to 4 when I'm already capped on Demonic Core stacks. And then I want to dump my Demon Bolts at 4 stacks, but I also want a Power Siphon for a bigger damage amp. It's a cool idea. I like it, but I just think, well, it just needs a little bit of help. I also want to mention here that this only works for one Demon Bolt. The stack of 1 to 4 stacks is consumed upon that Demon Bolt reaching the target and dealing damage. This is not currently a passive effect like the Rapture one is here. So I think a shift to something like this would be a good step in the right direction for this legendary, but in the end, what can we do? We'll see what happens with it. The third effect here is also a Demonology legendary. This is the Implosive Potential legendary. The effect is too limiting in certain settings. Like, in Mythic Plus, you might be pulling a trash pack with 3-4 mobs. You can implode and get a big haste buff, but then you go into a single target boss and it's a dead legendary effect. Now, I know that with Demonic Consumption no longer consuming imps and extending them, you can get a pretty big implosion off for, I guess, like, if it's like, what, 3-4 waves, you're looking at like 60-ish% haste, depending on what you implode and all that stuff, every minute and a half. But the thing is, when you're tyranting a single target boss, this legendary effect is dead. There are a couple bosses in Shadowlands, you have like a couple ads spawning that you can get there's a very small window where you can implode and try and get this proc, but it just feels sort of gross. As a legendary effect, I want it to be good in, you know, pretty much every setting that I'm playing it in. Some are better in rating, some are better in plus, but I don't want this being good in certain parts of plus and then bad in others. I want my legendary to be legendary. I want it to be good or at least playable in every setting. Obviously, hey, look, yeah, trash packs, more value. Single target, less value. But it's either really good or really bad. And I think it's almost too situational. A change I propose, which is actually brought up in stream today by CAD, a way to address this issue would be to give it, like, I guess like a 1% haste modifier. You can play with this. It'd be like 2% per imp imploded when it hits less than 3 targets. And an additional 2, 3, 4%, I guess, you know, up to 5, depending what you want to do with the first, you know, single target implosion effect, when it hits 3 or more targets. A 1 to 2% haste imp is not like the end of the world. It's like it's a huge, huge deal, but it's something, and it's still useful. It's still good in single target scenarios, and then it gains a lot more value in AoE, like mass implosion settings. With the actual duration only lasting 8 seconds too, it's not 15 like it is on live for explosive potential. It's pretty much half of that. So if it was 15 seconds, you could probably implode a pack before a boss, and then, all right, go, boss, let's go. And get at least a decent bit of that haste, but 8 seconds is just too limiting. So I would actually like to see this change. I like this idea a lot. It was a really good idea, I feel, personally. And hopefully this helps address some of the issues with implosive potential. Finally, the last legendary effect, it's not a demo one, surprisingly. It is the Wrath of Consumption legendary effect from Legion. It's back. This is a simple change. The Wrath of Consumption legendary effect needs to be changed to after you kill a target. That was the wording on the Wrath of Consumption artifact trait in Legion. It said after you kill a target, you gained a stack of Wrath of Consumption and it increased your damage. In Shadowlands, you can see here, targets that die with your agony applied to them grant you a stack. There's a big, big, big difference there. There are a lot of packs, I guess were a lot of packs in Legion, that you would just either cleave onto one mob, like the blood pool, like the Bloods in Darkheart Thicket, going to third boss from second, where you maybe just hit one briefly if you're in there with a huge AoE class, drain soul it, but it would die, and then your Soulfire would go off, or what was it called? Soulfire. How am I drawing a blank here? The AoE effect, Soul Flame, what's wrong with me, would go off, and you still get the tag on all 5 mobs from Wrath of Consumption. Now, we don't have Soul Flame anymore, but it would still make chaining this effect a lot easier in Mythic Plus, I guess in raiding, depending on what you're doing, because some mobs just get decimated, and if you're applying agony to them, you're not getting a whole lot of value out of them damage-wise, because you're going to put it up, it's going to die, you know? I think it just needs to be changed after you kill a target. Now, this effect does amplify your damage by a lot more than it did in Legion. It's 25% for 20 seconds if it stacks to 5, which is similar to like the initial Wrath of Consumption with Reap Souls, but I just think it's a simple change, but would go a long way for this legendary in Mythic Plus and a handful of fights in Nathria, like Sun King Salvation, Stone Legion Generals, other fights. I think it'd be a good solid change and help this make this a lot more playable in just a lot of settings. And finally, getting to Covenants here, which would be the last part of this video. I didn't really give feedback on Kyrian because, for the most part, Kyrian is just Kyrian. It's a dot that you're going to maintain if it doesn't kill the target, and if it does, you'll get your shards back, you'll spend it, and you'll refresh it when it comes back up. It's fine the way it is, it's okay. Hopefully it stays Havocable for Destro. Getting right into it, though, Night Fae. Night Fae is just not good for any spec at all, right now. The Soul Rod ability, even after the single target buff, is extremely undertuned and will not see any play in any setting currently. What I think Soul Rod needs to do is empower the next Drain Life cast that you cast as a Warlock, whether it's Affliction, Destro, or Demo. Empower it regardless. Now, this effect will stack with Inevitable Demise, but that's sort of just a cool thing that Affliction has. You're able to AoE a Drain Life. It's most impactful for Affliction because of IED. That's just how the spec's designed. It needs to empower the next Drain Life cast, because the buff they gave Soul Rot last week, it makes the dot damage relevant. The ability actually hits hard, but it only lasts for 8 seconds. So if you're in a Rapture window, if you're Rapturing, you don't get as many Rapture cast off as you do like playing, what is it? Oh, Impending Catastrophe, the Venthyr ability. It lasts 12 seconds. And you don't even cast Drain Life. Even when you cast Soul Rot, it's still that bad. It's still that bad. It just needs to empower your next Drain Life, and it'll stack with Affliction and ID, but being real, that's fine. Not a big deal. It gives Affliction a bit of a leg up on Destro and Demo playing Soul Rot. Now, in the end, I don't want to play Night Fate in the first place, but hey, who cares about that? Whatever brings the most damage is what you'll play. So, the other thing here is both Impending Catastrophe, Venthyr, and Decimating Bolt, obviously Necrolord, have a pretty long travel time, which makes both the abilities frustrating to play with occasionally. And I can show you the Necrolord one here. Like, I'll drop my turnip right here, if I can find it. There she is. There she is. We'll take a step back here, and let's go to, like, here. Let's cast Decimating Bolt. There's a decent bit of travel time there. And the unfortunate part with Decimating Bolt is that a lot of the time in Mythic Plus, you want to hold your bolt until the pack is nearly dead so you can get the biggest damage amp possible. But Decimating Bolt does not check how much health the target has upon resolution. It checks it when it hits the target, and the visual is awesome. It's cool. I love the random flying blue lines. It's really, really cool. But at the same time, it also feels really bad because there's been times in Plus you're trying to min-max value, and the mob just dies. And if it dies before it hits it, you don't get the stack at all. And not getting the stack really sucks. So, one way they could fix this is just make it like, I guess, snapshot or check mob health upon resolution, not whenever it reaches the target. Number two, they could decrease the travel time, which is potentially a thing. The visual is probably not going to change, though, so that's that. The same thing can sort of be said for Venthyr. This dot is extended by your Dark Lair, does count towards your Rapture count, but also has travel time. So, for the most part, if you're setting up your Dark Lair and you're playing Venthyr, you just cast it before your Singularity and your Unstable Affliction, and it's okay. Normally, it hits the target, but there have been times where I've lost some value because it just takes forever to hit the target. So, I would like to see the travel time increased on both of these, but in the end, there are multiple ways to address it, and hopefully one of them is taken. But losing your Decimating Bolt damage amp, whether you're Destro, or honestly even Demo, maybe especially Demo with the Decimating Bolt, Demon Bolt interactions now, feels really bad, and it just makes gameplay, like optimizing your gameplay, a bit tougher because you have to start casting it earlier than you normally like to in Mythic Plus in just a lot of settings where mobs are close to dying. Thanks for watching, dudes. I guess I can say that's probably going to be the last Warlock feedback document update that I do, as long as Shadowlands launches in late October. Now, we do have less than a month until Shadowlands launches. We still don't know when pre-patch is coming, but there are still a handful of class changes, tuning, all that being done on beta. Last week, we saw a lot of Covenant tuning for basically every class across the board. Some classes have got new talents, I believe. Some classes got some removed, and I'm still holding out hope that these Warlock changes are coming. This is going to be essentially the first week after the Salute Warlock cast with myself, THC, and Shelley. So hopefully tomorrow being Wednesday, a beta day, we see a handful of changes, and maybe this Google document is a bit less relevant. But hey, if that's the case, I'll take it. No problem. Once again, any weak auras, profiles, add-ons you guys saw here are available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, grab them, hang out, drop a follow, ask any questions. That is the best way to get a hold of me. Let me know what you guys think of this, I guess, final feedback variation in the comment section below. If I missed anything important, relevant, something you want me to hit on, leave it down below. I read every single comment. I swear I do. I might not respond to all of them, but I do. Leave it below. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, feel free to smash the subscribe button below as well. Helps out a lot. Thanks again, dudes, and I'll see you guys all again soon on stream. Peace.